Today on the Playbook Podcast, it's a big day in the courts as President Trump again tests the power of the Department of Justice. It is day 21 of the government shutdown and Trump's got the GOP round for lunch. And his nominee to lead the White House Office of Special Counsel is in very hot water. Hello, I'm Jack Blanchard.
And I'm Dasha Burns. It is Tuesday, October 21st.
And I have to say, if we sound a little bit different today, it's because our normal recording software has gone down the tubes because of the Amazon Web Services outage that seems to have hammered the entire world.
Podcasters, we're just like you.
Something like that. Dasha, it's a big day on the legal front today. Let's talk about court cases.
Yes.
And we've done that often enough on this podcast, haven't we, over the last few months?
But many court cases, and neither of us are JDs, which is unfortunate for everybody.
No, but luckily we do understand the politics of this.
Yes,
and
we do.
This is a very political case this morning. Listeners may remember Representative LaMonica McIver, who was arrested back in May in what I'll call a scuffle, which took place outside an immigration detention facility in Newark. She has been charged with assault following that scuffle. It was a very big story back in May. Well, today we have the first big court hearing when McIver's lawyers are going to try and get this case thrown out of court. The reason this is such a big deal, Dasha, is because Democrats, and she is a Democrat, say that this is another weaponized case. This is the Trump DOJ going after political opponents in a way that it would never do if this was a Republican. And that's one of the big reasons why this is such an explosive case.
Right. And she's not the only Democrat that has been involved in some sort of altercation with ICE officials or federal agents. Right. We've seen a number of those videos of lawmakers that have been part of those protests. And so depending on how this case goes, or this could potentially be a test case for Democrats to show, number one, continue the argument that they're making that Trump is weaponizing the DOJ to go after Democrats. And number two, it could show whether or not that can really be successful once it gets to this point.
They're certainly seeing it as a test case in the Democratic Party. I should say that the White House would dispute that strongly, and the Trump administration would dispute that strongly. They say, an assault took place in the DOJ's mind, and therefore, whoever you are, you have to be prosecuted under the law and so on. That's not the way the Democrats see it, and that's why this is such a political thing. I'll tell you what's fascinating about this case today, Dasha. I love this. Okay, this is not the actual court case today. This is an attempt, essentially by McIver's lawyers, to get the whole case thrown out. Now, they're trying to do that in two different ways. The first way is exactly what we saw from the FBI chief, James Comey, yesterday, which is to say this is essentially a political prosecution, and therefore it should go no further. Okay. There's a second way they're also pushing to have this case thrown out. They are saying that as a member of Congress, McIver should be granted legislative immunity. Now, that is the exact same thing that President Donald Trump won from the Supreme Court last year. And in the case citation by McIver's lawyers, they cite Trump versus United States as precedent for this because, of course, they say these are co-equal branches of government. And if it's good for the president, it should be good for Congress. And this was a member of Congress going about her duties, trying to inspect a detention facility as she's entitled. And they say it was absolutely she needed to do in her local area. She was stopped from doing that, and therefore she should have immunity, just like Trump got, essentially trying to flip the script.
I talked about how we don't have JDs. But I think we can safely say we are really in some wild, wild west legal territory here. And politically, I mean, the fact that these cases and this language is not only being used in the court of law, but this is something that we are all seeing and we are all reading. And you have a Democrat who was protesting and got in an altercation with law enforcement. You had the president. One of the first things Trump did when he got into office was to pardon those who were arrested and convicted for their actions on January 6th. He also just gave clemency to George Santos, who, I'm surprised we haven't spent more time talking about George Santos because that story is entirely and completely fascinating to me. But he's walking out after having been convicted and put in prison for all sorts of financial crimes and lies and fraud and all those things. Anyway, it's a bit of a hot mess legally and politically speaking.
You can say that again. And certainly I think, the Santos case, amazing to see him suddenly walk free. But again, Democrats saying, well, look how Republicans get treated by this DOJ. As you say, the January the 6th case, and then compare it to this, they say it is spectacularly inappropriate for a member of Congress to face assault charges, given what happened back in May. And by the way, what happened back in May, there's loads of camera footage of it. You can watch it for yourselves if you're listening to this. You can see what happens. You can decide for yourselves whether it was assault or not. And there's a lot of body cam footage that's now out from the agents as well. So it's going to be a really fascinating test case. I suspect it'll instantly be appealed to the appeals court, and probably, Dasha, this is another one that's going to end up going all the way to the Supreme Court either way, because there's no way that Donald Trump's DOJ want members of Congress to have the same immunity the president's got. And there's no way that the members of Congress, I guess, led by McIver, are going to stop pushing that. So I think this is yet another one where in a few weeks or months' time, we're going to be sitting down seeing what John Roberts and his pals have got to say.
Well, it's extraordinary. And again, politically speaking, there is still a real legal process that is really happening with real judges on the bench dealing with this stuff. But then politically, it just continues to amaze me that we do. Like there is video evidence of this. There was video evidence of January 6th, but like none of that seems to matter much anymore. Regardless of what is out there on tape, on camera, whatever like real legitimate evidence you provide that like would matter in a court of law, in public opinion, it is all narrative, and Democrats are latching on to this now. I mean, they are taking a page out of Trump's playbook, who, you know, was the first to claim weaponization of the DOJ, and of course everything that we said Democrats are saying right now is exactly what the Trump administration and Republicans would say Democrats did to them before. And that's not me doing a whataboutism. That's just like me like laying out the situation as it is politically, especially as each of the bases for these two parties sees it.
Yes, you're so right. And Donald Trump genuinely feels he was persecuted by multiple different administrations. And, you know, when you say to people close to Trump or big supporters of Trump that we're now seeing weaponization, they'll just laugh at that and say, look what happened. Look what happened to the president himself when he was no longer the president.
Yeah, and that's important to just point out, just because there is a huge swath of the country that sees it completely differently, right? Regardless of what's on video or what's in the courtroom.
Completely right. Just one more aspect to throw in on this court case before we move on, which is that the AG, the Attorney General pursuing these charges, is Alina Haber, who, of course, was Trump's personal attorney and was sort of, well, she couldn't really get confirmed in the role properly. And so they found this sort of, dare I say, slightly sneaky way to get her in as a sort of acting attorney. There was a whole federal appeals court hearing on that just yesterday where they were arguing. And to be honest, the judges sounded pretty skeptical about her appointment and the way that she'd got there. Who knows if she's even going to be able to keep this job yet.
And talk about the benefits of loyalty. Alina Haber is somebody that the president really likes. She stuck by him through all of those indictments and was next to him every time he made a court appearance. She is somebody that he has kept very close and was ready to deploy for this exact kind of purpose.
Absolutely, very highly rated by the president. We should say the president does win in court sometimes pretty big, and he did yesterday, Dasha, in a very different sort of case, on sending the military into Portland. We talked enough about that on this podcast over the last few weeks. Well, the appeals court hearing concluded yesterday that Trump can send the military into Portland. It's slightly complicated. They're not going in yet because there was a separate stay stopping that from happening, but it does rather look like now the courts are clearing the way for that deployment to happen. And my expectation is that we will see those troops in Oregon at some point this week, but we don't know yet for sure. Yet again, Dasha, you know it's headed for the Supreme Court. At some point, Roberts and co are going to have to sit down and decide, does a president, and not just this president, but every United States president from here on, have the power to send in the military onto the streets whenever they want by saying it's an emergency? These
history-making cases are stacking up real quick.
They really are. I think we'll spend more time watching the Supreme Court next year than we do watching the White House. Speaking of the White House, Donald Trump has a lunch date with pretty much the entire GOP from the Hill today. He is inviting over Republicans to thank them for their unity over the government shutdown, is how it's been put to us by the White House, and also to thank them for getting so many of his confirmations through. So we're going to see a pep talk, I suspect, from Donald Trump to the Republican Party.
Hang in there, guys.
Exactly. And, both sides still think they're winning this. It's day 21, as we said, of the shutdown, and it doesn't feel any closer to resolution than it did yesterday or last week or the week before.
No, but some operatives and folks that I've been talking to, actually on the Republican side, are starting to get a little bit worried because by the end of the month, the rubber might start to meet the road in terms of some of the practical impacts of this. Number one, we've been talking about those ACA subsidies and people seeing the numbers of how much their premiums are going to go up. Number two, some serious services like air traffic controllers, right? This is we had some reporting, Politico reporting that the OMB, Russ Vogt, that the administration is looking for ways to try to pay air traffic controllers, because that is what has broken the camel's back in the past, and they want to try to sort of take that off the table. Now that could provide some temporary relief, but you still have TSA, you still have a whole bunch of other stuff that could start to really impact folks, start to impact holiday travel. And that is where some of the Republicans I'm talking to say they're a little bit concerned that they're going to start to lose the narrative here.
Let's talk about one other big problem that Donald Trump has this morning, which is his nomination for the Office of Special Counsel, a guy called Paul Ingrassia. Politico reported yesterday on a text chat that showed Ingrassia saying that the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday should be, quote, tossed into the seventh circle of hell, and that Ingrassia has, quote, a Nazi streak. We should say that a lawyer for Ingrassia didn't confirm the texts were authentic and said they, quote, could be manipulated or are being provided with material context omitted. Important that we say that. Nevertheless, over on the Hill, the people who've got to confirm this guy, there's a nomination hearing scheduled for Thursday, are not sounding very positive about his nomination. Dasha and Senate Majority Leader John Thune said last night that he wants the White House to withdraw this nomination. So that they've got some thinking to do here, because if John Thune is saying he's not going to pass, and that's what he said last night, then you have to assume that he's not going to pass.
Thune stepping in here is a really, really big deal, especially, I mean, we just talked about how, the Republican leadership from the Hill will be at the White House to get patted on the back for getting all these nominees through. I mean, Thune has pressed through some pretty controversial folks. If he's saying this one's a no-go, that is going to go a really long way. Plus, this is something that I think Republicans really are going to want to steer clear of. You had J.D. Vance come in and brush off the last set of leaked text messages that the Politico reporter on last week with the young Republicans saying these are college kids. Like, we don't know these guys. Don't take this too seriously. Okay, now this is somebody that they actually want to put in a position of power that changes the dynamic completely, and is a lot harder to sort of brush off as a nothing burger as they did with the young Republicans.
Yeah, and not entirely successfully on that story either. And you have to say, right, for the Republican Party to have two big scandals in a week involving the word Nazi is not ideal, to say the least. Before we go, Dasha, let's talk about the White House. Did you see the extraordinary footage last night of, I don't know how to put it, Donald Trump knocking down part of the White House? I mean, that's what it was, right? The wrecking balls were in there.
The wrecking balls. And it's going to fit exactly 999 people. He keeps saying that number, 999
this is the new
people
ballroom.
Will go into the ballroom. Yes, which I just find very specific. Not 1,999.
It's very Trump. I love the way he's like just not a details guy on anything except for real estate stuff when he's like super engaged and spending hours picking out the trim for the walls and stuff, and obviously on this. But just as a metaphor for the whole thing, I mean, this guy has put a wrecking ball to so many things in terms of the presidency and his approach to it. You know, proudly
knock it down to build it back up in his image.
And now he's literally knocking down part of the White House. Yeah, I think those images will be remembered for a long time to come. All right, we better leave it there. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for joining as always, Dasha. We've got loads more news and analysis in today's Playbook newsletter, which you can find at politico.com/playbook. And we will, as always, be back tomorrow morning.